Hello, 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 and greetings, fellow adventurers of Vera. Welcome to Tavern Talk at the Golden Feather Tavern. We are Vertek and Chibi, keepers of this fine establishment. And the Golden Feather Tavern, by the way, is open to all travelers who come and share their thoughts on the inner workings of Vera over a nice tankard of ale, mead, hot chocolate, or any other delicious beverage of choice. So raise your glass, pull up a chair as we delve into tonight's discussion. Today is the 30th of July, 2024, and we're on episode 27, The History of Bard. And Cheapy, in case the title doesn't say it all, is there anything else we have on tap tonight? And how are you doing, by the way?
I am doing pretty good. I'm going to be a little bit low energy today just because I'm a little under the weather, just as a heads up to everybody. But basically, we're going to be kind of talking about the history of Bard. This was kind of sparked by Loreforge's video, which I'll be sharing later. Also, it'll be in the description for those of you watching on YouTube later. I highly recommend you check them out. I would say that podcast, that channel as a whole, are Bards. And we'll get into more of why later, as well as maybe some discussion about what we could think of Bard being for tomorrow, ahead of time before we get the official announcement. So by tomorrow, I'm talking about while this is live. By the time you're watching this, it may have already happened. In which case, check out our podcast with Neorine, where we will be talking about the live stream. So just putting that out there whenever you find this. But of course, we are joined by Lloyd at the moment, and who knows who else. Welcome in, Lloyd.
Hey, it's good to be a regular here at the tavern. A little quiet, but take it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all right. The quieter it is right now, the more noise you can make anyway, so.
There you go.
Oh yeah, we're just opening up the tavern, so it's fine.
But if this appeals to you, feel free to give us a follow, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit that notification bell to see when we go live. And our guests are usually welcome as long as we've had them on the show at least one time. We are deciding to limit it to up to 4 guests, so 6 of us in total. And we would like to try and limit one of those slots to be a member from the community who's maybe not as used to being on camera, for example, or joining in on a podcast. But yeah, going forward, this will probably be like the more open evening to bring people on to come chat with us. But first and foremost, as you guys have noticed, there is a poll at the top asking, have you played a Bard before? So, Lloyd, Vertek, have you guys played Bard before?
Yeah, I have in D&D, but outside of that, not really, not at all. So, okay. I think a lot of the community also is kind of like wondering what is Ashes of Creation's Bard going to look like, and I think that's where a lot of the excitement is coming from right now.
Oh yeah, and I have plans to delve into what Intrepid has shared on that a little later for sure. Vertek, have you played a Bard?
I have played a Bard in a bunch of different games. Tried tinkering with it a little bit in D&D, but you see, as we've talked about a couple times on the stream, I'm not as much an actual like role player. I fit in the role and I do the things, but when it comes to acting it out, I'm not so great. And a lot of D&D tables, yeah, you kind of have to act it out. And who can't, or who could pull off a Bard without being somewhat grandiose and like very outstanding personality with it? So I didn't touch it too much there. I kind of tinkered with it a little bit here and there, but I didn't go too far. But in the vidya games, I try them every time I see them. And most of them I have forgotten because they didn't feel like what I imagined a Bard to be. So I just kind of moved on.
When you play D&D, are you like a fighter and you just go, I hit the thing with my sword?
No, you see, I get a little bit more interesting than that. Yeah, I get a little bit more interesting than that. It's just, I figure, like, I'm not the greatest at coming up with, like, one-liners when it's a performative thing. I'm good at coming up with one-liners when it's me and my friends hanging out and just throw a quick zinger. But
Nice.
when it comes to trying to play a part of somebody else coming up with a one-liner, I get stuck.
Yeah.
Like vicious
That being said,
mockery.
he's also like comparing himself to me, who's a bit more on the role play side than he is. So he doesn't
Fair
feel like
enough.
he's all that role play, but compared to somebody who doesn't role play at all, he's a lot more role play. So
Okay.
that
There's a
actually brought
spectrum.
me. Yeah, there's a spectrum. For me, I've played Bard a couple of times. I've been curious by it. But I haven't really been too drawn to actually try it. That being said, I never really went out of my way to sit down and try it, except for maybe like in D&D, as Lloyd mentioned. A lot of you guys saw me play, what was it, a halfling bard for the Halloween one-shot last year. And that was pretty fun. I tried to be witty with it. Kind of like, you know, Bumblebee, where he's using different songs to communicate. I was using different songs to enhance the mood.
That's awesome.
So that was really fun. But that brings me to the next question of what, in your mind, if you close your eyes and just imagine and I said Bard, what comes to mind? And what do you imagine Bard being? Like without any preconceptions of any games or anything like that.
For me, like I immediately think of like Volo, from Baldur's Gate 3. I think it's more on like what a bard to me is a storyteller in some form. And that can range from multiple different things, whether it's poetry, songwriting, dancing, or telling through a story through choreography or something like that. That's what I picture a bard to be. However, if you were to like ask like what the stereotypical person is about like what a bard would be in a video game, it would be just like the musical aspect. So
Right.
I'm really hoping Ashes will go with the more broader, different variation type of bard rather than just pigeonholing into the musical artistry version of it.
Yeah.
Two things come to mind. One, that flute song, and two, because of the flute song, Bard is obviously internationally known, amazing floor-killing DJ, of course. But cheers and thank you, Nair. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nair. Appreciate you.
But no, seriously, I'm basically on the same page as you are there, Lloyd. It's got to be something to do with education, storytelling, like putting emotions and situations down on paper or into voice. Yeah, and including or into instrument, I should say, because technically the human voice is an instrument when it comes to music.
Yeah.
And to kind of go off of that, for me, I not only did we watch, I'm going to put out Loreforge's video here. I definitely recommend going and watching that if you haven't already on their account of history of bards. But like that originated from like Irish and Celtic and kind of evolved. It's actually a medieval thing to have happened. It's kind of what brought about the musical era, is one of the studies that I came across, and I actually found that rather interesting because, you think of something like just the history of mankind in general. You know, we're taught that the ancient civilizations back with the cavemen, they would do pictographs on the cave walls to depict their story. And would express like some hard things that they've gone through, be it like a saber-toothed cat attacking their tribe or something like that. And I'm totally not thinking of Ice Age when I'm talking about this, but
not at all.
And it's just an interesting way because there's that, and then you find poems that are written, then you have like accounts of things like diaries that are written to account for things that have happened that get passed down. You have ancient stories that get passed down from generation to generation. I saw that a lot with like the Native American tribes as well as other cultures, where they tell a story of like their ancestors. And I feel like that's kind of where Bard came from, and that completely makes sense with what you guys are saying as well. It was kind of any way that you can communicate to tell a story, um, and um, you know, more recently, yeah, you've even got Stikeno who's telling the story through rap. I think some rap that I like actually is telling a good story. Some older songs, like around the 90s, were songs that actually had a story to them, a meaning to them that they were trying to convey. That I found that I liked those a lot more. And it's just like this expression. And for me, the one that like cult classic that I can think of is from The Witcher, the Bard from The Witcher. Um, and I think that's a great example because not only is he entertaining, but he's also, he's also like charismatic. And that brings me to video games and the interpretation of Bard in video games. Um, so fun fact, I didn't know this. I was doing research for this for tonight. Bard was not in first edition of D&D. I believe it did not show up until third edition, but the only way you could get Bard in first edition was to take a certain level of different classes, and then you were a Bard.
Oh, that makes sense for how 5e has like them getting like expertise and all that stuff. That makes sense. It's like
Yeah,
a historical version of the bard itself.
yeah,
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, because I think historically they've all been fairly well educated, and you would almost think they would have to be able to, one, play instruments, two, be able to afford an instrument, three, be
yeah,
able to read and write back in them their times.
yeah.
And
Yeah, I started
Um,
playing D&D in like 5e, so yeah, I had no idea, but that's really cool to know.
yeah, and there's also like for the Celtic thing, kind of what Vertek was just touching on. The It was actually kind of interesting. So bards in the medieval times were considered, like these very gifted singers and songwriters and like storytellers, but they would tell stories for the kings and things that the soldiers did, which why like Toss a Coin Dear Witcher, where he is talking about all the things that the Witcher does for their community, all the like fights he has, the thrilling adventures, why that it makes sense and it's so compelling. But that being said, they were also often wanderers, they were beggars, because they had no home. They would just wander from place to place. And it's actually kind of funny because somewhere along the lines, people started equating D&D bards with like, I want to seduce the dragon. But
It's the high charisma, man.
yeah, but that's the thing. Like they are actually a very versatile class. And they have all of these backgrounds to them, which is why I thought it was very interesting in first edition that you had to get these different classes to be able to become a bard. And
so what you're saying, what you're saying is Star Wars Galaxies stole the idea of the Jedi from D&D version 1.
I'm neither confirming nor denying that.
Okay, just saying.
But to continue on with the charisma or charismatic side of Bard, that could be anything. That could be somebody with a silver tongue. That could be somebody who's easy to like. I could also see Bard being the person that's a salesperson that can sell you anything, because they just know how to like tell you stuff just the right way. To get you to be interested in what they're talking about, or like to influence you, and I find that very interesting. So here are some examples of Bard in a couple of different games, and the first one that came to mind was Sona in League of Legends. She's an obvious one. She's got that giant piano around her. She's like, making music. I could also
Can't
see
talk.
along. Huh?
She can't talk.
She can't talk.
She's mute.
Mm,
So she does all of her music as a way of communication.
yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And I like that she can like buff her allies and like help them with like speed buffs or like damage buffs, you know. Additionally, there is you know, going down that same kind of techno bard idea, Lucio from Overwatch, with his healing abilities. I forgot who it was. I think it may have been Basil, Luna, Snow in Marvel Watch.
Marvel Watch.
Rivals.
Okay, I love the game, but I'm forever gonna call it Marvel Watch. Forever.
But then I also started looking at, you know, video games, and there was a bard class in, I believe, EverQuest, and Ezio from Assassin's Creed was considered a bard, and you're seeing people like Venti in Genshin Impact, and there's
Wait, if we're considering Ezio from Assassin's Creed a bard, does that mean Batman's a bard too? He's very charismatic.
Yeah.
And he's just a knight in the dark.
I think he could be.
No, not Batman. Maybe Bruce Wayne.
Bruce Wayne, maybe.
Batman wasn't exactly charismatic. If anything, he was the anti-charisma.
He was just the one walking around whispering everywhere.
Yeah.
Where are the drugs?
Yes, Bruce Wayne had all the charisma in that pairing.
Yep.
That's funny. But yeah, so in order to be a bard in D&D first edition, you had a multi-class fighter, thief, and a magic user, which was later druid. You had to get all the prerequisite levels in each of those single classes before becoming a bard. And the inspiration for that was actually the Nordic skalds and druidic bards, which were like wise women and lore keepers, hence, you know, Loreforge being a bard of sorts. And, you know, there were different types of bards. Loreforged.
Loreforged is, by the way, the Voltron of bards. It's got all three, and together they form one large bardious group.
Yep. Absolutely. Can confirm.
That's very fair. That's very fair. But apparently, according to historians, there's 3 different types of bards in medieval. The first one saying about like praises and victories that happened. So like if your country won a war, or like if this person was a nobleman, think like Peter Pan, not Peter Pan, wow. But like, who was it?
They spread propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. Spread propaganda. You could even think of the Piper as being a type of bard. The second one saying about the laws of the nation. You know, an easy. I mean, let's just be honest. I'm pretty sure if I did like any of the commercial jingles, you would know it and it would get stuck in your head, which is why song is so popular. You know, song is so important. So being able to remember like the laws of a nation and things like that, like these important things, it makes sense that song would be used. And finally, the third one is about family histories and poetic genealogies. So I thought that was really interesting. But to go back to the gaming side of things, there's also a bard class in Final Fantasy. I don't know if you've played many of the Final Fantasy games.
I actually have. I did play the bard. Well, I played an archer in Final Fantasy 14. Never made it to bard because I didn't like the global cooldowns on Final Fantasy 14, but
that's fair.
Technically I was on my way towards it.
Protected you. I think we had this conversation. I don't think we've really got to the bard part of Final Fantasy 14.
We apparently did not, because we both played to level like 20 something and said this is not a bard. I'm playing an archer. There's no bardery happening here.
Yeah.
I'm playing an archer is what it is.
And
For
I gave up at level 20 as an archer because I learned that the profession was going to turn into a bard, and I was like, I don't want to be a bard. I want to be an archer.
that's fair.
Whoops.
Womp womp.
So in order to become a bard in Final Fantasy 14, you have to get to level 30 and upgrade from the archer class. And apparently it was also intended to be one of those music-based classes. There's Battle Voice, a Bard's Tale, the Wanderer's Minuet, and as well as other things. And this kind of brings me back to kind of like the College of Bard, and maybe talking about our hopes for Ashes of Creation Bard, because within D&D there's different colleges you can do, so it's not always just about music. For example, there's the College of Swords, and I can imagine that being some intriguing dance with like daggers or something, kind of like DPS focused bard, because they're built initially as more of a versatile class. My question to you guys is, how versatile do you see bard being in Ashes of Creation?
Oh, hey, really quick, before you start there, Lloyd, we have a Lulu in livestream queue.
Oh,
do
yeah,
we?
he
Okay.
played Lineage 2. Did Lineage 2 have a bard?
He said, actually, earlier, I was about to read it. So Lulu says, there are also bards in the Lineage too, but no one would know about those because it's not like someone just gave a lesson on them.
Yeah. Welcome in, by the way, Lulu.
Yeah, welcome in.
Oh, yeah, hi. I AFK'd just 1 second before you pulled me in. Hi.
Oh, that timing, the timing is amazing.
Yeah, perfect timing. Did you ask me something because I missed it?
Oh, yeah,
just
Chibi, go
say
ahead and
hi.
ask again, and we'll have Lloyd go first because he's already prepped up for it.
Yeah, that works. I was just gonna say, based on knowing in D&D that bard was built to be more versatile. For example, the College of Swords, where perhaps you could be dancing with swords and dealing a lot more DPS rather than healing. How versatile do you see bard being in Ashes of Creation?
I think it will be massively versatile. The reason being is because I don't think you can have a party without a bard with how it's planned to be designed.
Mhm.
And I also think that bard with any of the secondary archetypes will be a strong class in general, just because of like being able to buff or in a certain way to help synergize to make your comp like really stand out could really help each party, especially if you have 8 bards and 8 different parties in a full raid. Kind of just, or maybe not in a full raid would be 40, but like having a bard or two in each of the different group parties so that they can buff up each different archetype to their max, or if they can do like certain proximity buffs, like I think they will be massively important. They may not ever reach the top of the DPS floor, but they will help extend other archetypes in a way that will allow them to do that. And I think no matter which class you choose with the bard secondary archetype, I think it will give you a lot of utility and a lot of option in your build as well. So like
Awesome.
what I see a bard is just like like if you were to play like Magic the Gathering, they're like a white coloring where they are very versatile and will allow you to kind of be able to use utility in a different way that you wouldn't normally be able to. And I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, since literally you just joined, we're going to get into what we know about bard a little bit later. We're just kind of speculating what we think might be it. So what is your answer?
I mean, it's a bit unfair because Lloyd just said pretty much what I wanted to say and what I expect from Ashes of Bards. Because I also think that they will be buffing their party. I hope that it's only party and not raid wide or whatever. So it would be 5 bards per raid. And I do hope they pretty much increase the output of anything of any class. So healer would be healing stronger because of the bard, the DPSs would be hitting stronger, and whatever, the tank would be tankier, the classic stuff. They would make everyone better, which is their highest value, the bard's highest value. And in terms of variety, I do think that it's gonna be huge, mostly because of the augments, because a bard that can augment themselves as a mage and like have TPs and stuff could maybe move around the entire battlefield in a huge fight through buffing everyone. So if their party gets spread out, maybe they can defend someone better in a pinch or whatever. So I do think that variety will be huge.
Yeah, I like that. What are your thoughts, Vertec?
I'm kind of in the same camp as these other two here. I've always envisioned a bard in my mind as being someone who would be fairly versatile in a fight themselves, but maybe not incorporating so much of a like an instrument-based music. Maybe just rallying cry type of things, like, you know, get up guys, go, we got this, because blah blah blah, you remember the Alamo, that type of thing. Like remembering things about history and whatnot, just to inspire people in the moment, but then just going about like a kind of well-rounded fighting / defensive style while assisting everyone else, making them better. And like Lulu said, have we been saying that correctly? Is it Lulu?
Yeah, Lulu.
All right, score 1. But like Lulu said, very much buff everyone else's abilities, which when you're running around solo would buff yours, but maybe not to the greatest advantage that somebody who uses that specific buff type would actually make use of it. But I'm kind of caught on would I want it to be party-wide only so that you need to bring multiple bards in a raid, or should there be so much choice to what they can do that it is a raid-wide buff, but you need multiple bards to get the full benefit out of bards existing?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense.
A more of a synergistic approach rather than just OP one.
Yeah, like one could give like a higher crit rate to your party, but then another one, because there's 2 choices to that skill, you can do crit rate or crit damage, and then you'd need to bring another bard to get the crit damage as well.
Oh, I like that, because I talked about that in my lesson, and when we get to discussion of our experience, I'll try to remember that.
Yeah. For mine, I agree with both of you, and also Vertec's opinion on it. I see Bard as kind of like a mirror of the Summoner class. And what I mean by that is Summoner is very versatile because of their summons. You can have a more tanky type of Summoner, you can have a more healy type of Summoner, you have a very DPS-y type of Summoner. It's all based on their summons. And I think that the Bard class itself is going to be versatile because of the secondaries. So I think that if you have more of a, like, I'm thinking a tank type of thing, maybe you can have different buffs that help with tankiness, maybe like kind of taking damage in place of like a heal. Sense of healing, maybe you're damage mitigating. For DPS, I could see it being a tick of damage every time someone attacks you. Could be dealing some DPS to that, or buffing somebody else's DPS. And then with Cleric, I could see having a bit of healing over time applied to your buffs. As well as, you know, maybe a Bard fighter would be able to do more direct damage to the enemies while also buffing the friends, kind of like with Luna. I don't know if you guys know with Marvel Rivals, but you can damage and heal people with the same ability. as Luna. And I really like that because it's pretty simple, but it's all about who you're targeting at the moment. And I can see the versatility in that. Bard. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Gladys. We have a
Hey.
raid coming in.
Gladys.
Cheers to the raid.
I want to say that I do think that Intrepid has already thought about how they are going to implement like the structure of like how bards will act in a party, as it will be proximity based is what we know, and proximity will allow, you know, only certain members. Like if you are buffing up the tanks, you got to be in next to the boss with the tanks. You got to make sure that they're within the range so that you're giving them the things. If you're more of like an enchanter bard where you're like healing and shielding and doing these buffs, then yeah, maybe you are on the back line healing from afar, or you are going to be helping buff your attack damage, magic casters, physical damage, or whatever you need to do. Or maybe you're doing like that College of Swords bard where you are using your attacks as proximity based buffs to your teammates around you, like a standard bearer might do, like where you're running in, you're stabbing people with your standard and also rallying the charge ahead. Like maybe that's something that happens. Like I think there's a lot of potential for the bard, and I think that's why we're all so excited for it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And real quick, Vladis, thank you so very much for the raid. Hello, Quaternian. We're talking about like the history of bards and how that might affect our thoughts on what we're gonna see tomorrow for the live stream, and our general thoughts on what a primary secondary with bard could be. And welcome in all the raiders. Glad to hear your thoughts as well. A crafter harvester bard, one that buffs artisans, that would be really, really cool.
I just read that. That'd actually be pretty nifty. Buffs that give outside of combat buffs.
I really like that. Yeah.
And
especially
just
when you think
in
about
general,
like
more utility buffs.
Yeah. I was
About
gonna
living
say,
on a farm.
even with the node wars, like where you had to gather stuff, like if you're buffing the gathering to help accomplish the goal faster, that would help the objective as well.
Yeah, I like that. Now, real quick, I want to know, Lulu, because I don't think any of us besides you have played Lineage 2. How was Bard in that game?
We're gonna be here for an hour because I just finished discussing them for an hour. But the short version is mostly just general buffs to stats, and they barely did any damage. Few of the bards relied on dot damage, and I would prefer if Ashes also bards and Ashes also relied on dot damage, mostly because I don't really see how bards could be DPSers, like direct DPSers, or at least I would prefer if they weren't, personally. And in terms of the application itself, it's also in AoE around you, so limited range, and a few buffs relied on triggers, so the bard's actions. Especially one of my favorite examples is you have a buff that when you get hit, it triggers an additional buff that gives you more critical damage, while the base buff itself decreases critical damage against you. So it's a double effect. And the other example is when the bard uses a specific ability. He has a passive that can randomly trigger, and it'll go to the entire party, boosting their attack speed by 50%, which was huge for archers and melees. So I think that buffs that either get better or have deeper effects based on the bard's actions would be great for Ashes, and Lineage 2 had that.
I have a quick question. In Lineage 2, when you had the proximity buff, did it limit the amount of people within that proximity, or is it just anybody
No.
in that proximity?
No.
No. Okay.
The proximity was limited only. No, the effect was limited by party or by guild. So one of the buffers only gave buffs to the party. A few were single targets, but in terms of AoE, there was another buffer that gave his buff to entire guild. So if they managed to fit into the AoE, they would all get the buff. So that was quite OP, and I personally dislike that in Lineage 2, especially because one of the buffs was a 30-second invincibility, which was way too OP. So I hope Ashes doesn't have that.
Gotcha.
You know,
One other question. Oh, sorry.
Just real quick in response to that, I would be the mage rogue who'd be hiding in the bushes telling all my friends, like, by the way, there's a bard there. They're going to cast the invincibility, and then they're going to grab all their friends, and they're all going to be huddled up right there, and they're going to cast another buff. As soon as it ticks like the 5 seconds before the 6 second when it ends, everyone start casting your AoEs and just nuke them right down. Ready, set, go.
Yep.
That was usually what was done, yes, but the invincibility buff was mainly used when trying to breach gates and holes in walls of castles and stuff like that, or to run through a corridor that's filled with AoEs. It lasted 30 seconds, and couldn't use any abilities, but you could just run. So people would just boost it through a gate or through a corridor, which it's OP as hell. And I personally disliked it quite a lot.
That's bananas.
That's fair.
What were you saying, Jimmy? Sorry.
A question from Sir Unsington is, did bards have issues progressing in Lineage 2 due to the lack of damage, or was it manageable?
I'd say they were the most OP solo class, because in Lineage 2 pretty much all the parties and just even single players damage relied on the bards, because bards provided the buffs that increased your damage multiple times over. So a bard that had those buffs for himself just could use it on himself and go farm. So while you didn't have the direct damage output, like abilities that do a ton of damage or stuff like that, you still had the buffs that allowed you to farm.
Gotcha. Okay. And that also brought up into my mind, because I don't know about the rest of you with D&D, but there's a trope that bards are kind of useless. The ones like sit in the back just like strumming a guitar. There was actually a Viva La, what was it, Dirt? The video on Bard Phantom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, friend.
Appreciate that. Cheers.
Much appreciated. Cheers.
There's
indeed.
a video about that where this guy who's a bard and like 3 fighters are like taking down this orc or this cyclops, and they're like, all right, we need a plan. This is what we're gonna do. And he's like, oh, I'm gonna sing a song and I shall buff you. And so he's just like strumming his little like ukulele in the back, and then the cyclops goes to like kill him because he's already killed all of his friends. He's like, I don't want to die. I'm just trying to sing. So like there's that, like, very bards can be very squishy, but also obviously can be very OP.
Yeah, I think they're the clutch factor. So it's like they're never like strong, but they're the reason why you win the fight. You know, like they are that like little pivotal instance in whether you win or lose a fight, where that one wizard is about to cast Death of Pain and you're like, 9th level counterspell you, bitch. That's it.
I have one word for you: counterspell.
That's 2 words, but it's kind of conjoined. But whatever.
If you just say it really fast, it's one.
Counterspell.
Yeah, exactly. See, but actually, to the chat's point, they would like to see, and also to Lloyd's point, they'd like to see Bard be effective outside of battle. And that kind of, to me, comes in the mind with D&D of bless, when you can lay on hands and bless somebody. So like being able to give somebody a buff, Basil was saying, for animal husbandry. Somebody else mentioned for Ragnarok Online for blacksmithing. Being able to bless somebody and give them potentially a better chance at something. I could even see that being useful, buying a Bard's Blessing for trying to enchant your item or over enchant your item.
Always #blessed.
I
Less.
think this could be done
Every day, all day.
through usage of different instruments. So, for example, one instrument would be a more of a battle-oriented one, so you'd use it in like PvP or PvE, and one could be artisanal or just used as a utility for like over enchanting and stuff like that, plus luck and whatever.
Yeah.
So I think they could do this potentially.
We
Yeah, I
also
can
have to
see
be
it.
careful of like the bard crossing over too much into a cleric's territory as well. Like I'm also thinking of blessed being like
A healing.
cleric spell or like a healing
Yeah.
spell. So I mean like there's healing bards, there's and stuff, but like
Could call it like inspire.
bard healing is if bard's healing is too high, then there's no point to be a cleric anymore, you know, like
That
I
makes
think they
sense.
have to be very unique playstyles between the cleric and the bard.
I could see a cleric primary being like a holy priest, and
Mhm.
a bard cleric being something akin to like a druid healer, where it's a
Mhm.
lot of hots.
I was just about to say that, yeah. That's I think bards will be all about hots, dots, that type of stuff. So no burst, but overall it's present, both
Or
on
like
healing and
hots.
on damage.
Hots and shadow priest, was that the barrier?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the
Forgot the name
shields.
of the ability.
Shield healing or hot healing. I could see that for
Mhm.
bard.
Yeah, yeah. Power word shield.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I could see
there you go.
cleric being the single target, big burst heals, the targeted hots that actually tick fairly well, and then a
Mhm.
bard would be a blanket. Whoever's in this AOE gets a trickle heal, and maybe as like a really long cooldown, they can pop out like 5 heal over times for like
Yeah.
every minute or something. They can pop out like a handful of heal over times, and that's it.
Yeah. And I could see even like bard summoner being kind of like a shaman heals with like the totems, but you have the summon to help you with the healing.
Mhm.
So. Vertek, were you gonna say something else earlier?
I was just gonna say because Vladis took a moment to say anything in chat because he was
Yes.
closing up shop with Phantom, and I just told him, you know, of course, you know how we do things. That's the same exact thing we do. We kind of close up shop with whoever we had on the channel, and one of us does
Absolutely.
that, and the other takes care of talking with whatever channel we rated over to. So
Yeah.
welcome in. Now that you're able to hear,
Yes.
and I
Thank
hope
you
you're
so much
streaming
for the
really well.
read. Really appreciate it. And
Also,
by the
a
way,
question for you in chat real quick. What are your thoughts about buff canceling in the context of bards giving out
Counterspell?
buffs? Not just counter spell, but like say you have 10 buffs on you that last maybe like 10 minutes, so someone could remove those buffs or maybe potentially steal those buffs or something like that.
Hard to implement mechanically because like
Hmm,
if
in what
you
way?
like say they have 4 different buffs on them and you cast like the debuff skill to remove the buff, which buff are you removing? All of them? One of them?
At
At
that's
random?
the
The last
that's the
one that
design.
was cast?
Yeah, that's the design decision. That's the point. Lineage 2 had steal, cancel generalized, and cancel specialized. So steal would remove. No, I mean it would directly steal the last buffs that were casted on the target. Then the generalized cancel would just randomly hit any buff that you had last casted at a chance. So for example, it was 30% chance to cancel a buff, and it would check every single buff on your entire bar. If you had 20 buffs, it would go through all of them and just check how many it could cancel by chance. And then targeted cancels would rely on the type of the buff you had. So for example, if you had a buff that increased your physical defense, someone had a cancel that would remove that exact type of buff. And then it would also put a debuff on you where for 2 minutes you couldn't reacquire the same type of buff again. So that kind of stuff.
My immediate
I personally
thought
hope
was
we
like,
have this kind of interaction in Ashes.
yeah, my immediate thought was like, damn, that's a lot of hotkeys. But like, I also
Yeah,
thought
it is.
about it as like, what if they implemented what League of Legends did for Hui, where you press one button for the hotkey, and then you press another one for which type of debuff that you want to do. So like Hui, you can press Q, and then he has 4 options, QW, or he has 3 more options, QWE, to decide which one he wants. So say the hotkey is on ability 1, you press 1, and then you debuff either 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then you can use those as that. So it limits the amount of hotkeys that you do, while also giving you the option to use like skill expression.
Could be that, or even just through augments. So, for example, you maybe a bard has a generalized cancel that works in whatever way, but then if you get a augment from the mage, this cancel now targets or can target mage buffs, or for example, it targets mana buffs or whatever. If you get an augment from the cleric, it can remove healing buffs or stuff like that. So, augment based rather than just action based as well. Okay. They have a ton of potential in all kinds of designs, so I do hope we see something like that, because if there are buffs and they are powerful, we gotta have a way to either remove them, to make them less powerful, or to potentially steal them, which was my my personal favorite in Lineage 2.
So how fun would it be if Bard is going to be a big buff class, right? A buff and debuff class, right? What if Mage was a dispelling class that would dispel positive effects and or negative effects depending on who you're casting it on, friend or foe, but then also leave a lingering effect where that same spell couldn't be cast again on that person for X amount of time, and a summoner could summon said buff off of enemies onto themselves, but it ticks down to whatever it's currently at.
Yep, would be great. And Lineage 2's mages specialized in cancellation. So you are really close to what inspired Steven already. So potentially we could see something like that.
Yeah.
Silence, I could absolutely see that being a mage thing.
Yeah, I could see silence being a mage thing, because also like they have the ability to see invisible people from the spell list that was on their wiki.
Arcane Eye or whatever.
Can they see Bruce Willis?
But yeah, I was also wanting to say that I think it would be really interesting because, you know, I think the important thing from my experience with the Node Wars testing was that, you know, I actually have this in the video that I'm trying to figure out when to put it up. I'm sorry guys for the delay on that one, but I was mentioning how like everything felt like reactive. I didn't feel like let me press 1, 2, 3 and then 5, 1, 2, 3 and then 4. Excuse me.
Which is super nice to hear from my perspective.
And I would like to see how they do that with Bard as well. Pardon me.
Drink. Hydrate.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I would like to see how that like incorporates itself into Bard with these buffs and debuffs, you know, not having a certain that, what do you call it? I forgot what it was called. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5.
Rotation?
Repeat. Yeah. Rotation. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
See, I was thinking
and
it'd be
ideally,
something like Sir Onsington put out there. Love the idea of segueing from offensive to defensive mid-song with skill strokes and moves. I always thought it'd be really cool to get a Bard class in a game that reacted in real time to what you're doing. Like if there were different sections of a song, and you could cast out.
That's what I want in Ashes.
Yeah, like cast out a spell of a certain type of song, but then you have a second part that determines if it's AOE or single target. Another one if it's, you know, burst, or if it's going to last over time, that type of thing. And it just weakens or strengthens depending on which direction you go with it.
Like if you had like certain combo rotations that would do a specific effect, that would be pretty interesting. Bard would be like the ultimate piano keyboard class then, because you're just like, oh, let me do like 1, 2, 3, and then it'll do this thing, and if I do 2, 3, 1, it'll do this thing.
This other thing,
Like
so
the more
it would literally turn you into a piano.
Exactly. Like one heal will get you 2,000 hit points, but is it all on one person in a single instance, or is it across 10 people over 5 seconds?
That's actually really cool because if you think about like supports in a generalistic theory, like a lot of people look at supports as like, oh, you're picking that because you don't know how to play the game. You're not mechanically good at the game. What if you were able to make a bard mechanically good? And so that like only the best players or the best bards are like actually considered the best players.
Ooh.
That's another thing to think about too.
And actually,
The
to even add that, just to, did I click the wrong one? I may have clicked the wrong one. Yeah, I did click the wrong one. That would overcomplicate the class. And honestly, it kind of fits in there. Facade and Z says that sounds cool, but that would overcomplicate the class while you're doing everything else. But the one I wanted to highlight was right above it from Mr. Dras Leona. The longer you charge it, the longer it lasts and more AoE. Fast casting single target. That'd be kind of neat too if there was almost like actual parts, like named parts of the spell casting after poems and songs, like you know, bridge and this and that, and you have to like loop through it to power it up, like a couple key presses to do your power up, and then after that you decide if it's AoE and then single target or mass, and that's when it casts.
That's kind of what I was gonna bring into the other perspective is, you know, a lot of this is real time, but maybe bards would have a slightly different play style of being somewhat strategic, where you plan out your songs and there's like a set order, but then you're able to kind of interrupt that song a little bit to deal like real time things if you need to do a real quick damage. But I could see bards definitely being kind of the back of the group, or like middle to back of the group, to be away from like the front lines, unlike clerics, where clerics are potentially front line or back lines, depending on your play style or how you build it. But I could see you kind of building up and designing as you're going through it, and then adjusting as you see fit as you go.
Intrepid just need to balance it in a way where the floor is still relatively low while the ceiling is super high. Because if no one can even play bards, then we're in a problem.
Yeah, then you have an overcomplicated class that few will play, but it may still draw a certain few people because they're like, ooh, what's the hardest class I can learn?
Yeah, I'm also of the opinion that the less buttons that you have to press, you initially lower the skill floor, but the complicated like different combos and positioning and stuff like that, that's what raises the skill ceiling. And I think just having too many spells on your bar is going to be the make it or break it on whether or not you can introduce like a low skill floor, high skill ceiling type of archetype.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, Sounding says, looking forward to the tavern conversations of the bards claiming to be the main tank.
Be amazing.
Yeah, they could, right?
And Basil says, I'm old, give me less buttons.
Funnily enough, in Lineage 2, the two main true bards who were singing songs and dancing dances stemmed off the class of the tank. So they usually, especially at lower levels, would tank like a dungeon or potentially even a boss. So some of those bards could be claiming to be main tanks, yeah.
Very fair. Another idea I had was, instead of like pressing 1 and then like the keys changing, what if a while back we had a whole conversation on radial dial menus? What if you press 1 and a little radial dial menu popped up and you moved your mouse in the direction of which one you want it to be? That would keep you engaged with the fight, and it would also bring your attention back focally centered. So you can
may be able to do both. Like you could have like each part of the radio dial be a different key. So you could like do like 1-1, or you could do 1 and then do the radial menu. Like
that way it's like
I'm of the
easier.
opinion that if you do the radial menu, that you can just drag your mouse and not have to actually click the button. You can just be like off and let go of the button, and upon release it'll do it.
Yeah,
because
I like that
if
as
I have to
well.
click a radial menu, then I am going to lose my mind.
No. I think being able to just drag it in the direction you're looking for would be interesting.
Yep.
As long as they don't make it too clunky. because
Yeah,
those mechanics are usually quite clunky.
I can see
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Surrounding just says, give me BDO combos for Bard spells, Grin, and then Wicked Hijinks. Hello, welcome in. Says that might make me want to play a Bard. And then two antagonist point. Key combos and having press and hold abilities would be sick. And that was what I was going to bring us into. We've already seen it with things like the Archer, where if you press the button, it does something different than if you just hold the button. And I would love to see what they're going to do with Bard in that aspect. I'd love to see maybe a smaller hot that does a burst amount of healing, but maybe if you press and hold it, it applies maybe to more people, or it applies more of an actual longer term buff to the people that you're trying to target, and then that then does a tick of healing over time instead.
You gotta
I don't know.
hold those notes.
This may be
Yeah.
a slight tangent off of this, but I do know that they'd recently hired the combat designer, and I think
Yes.
it was Adam something, and his opinion is that he likes skill expression and reaction gameplay, which is something that we can say that this is something that he personally likes, and that may be the direction that Intrepid is trying to go.
I think reactionary gameplay is super amazing. I don't mind a rotation, but it feels mindless after a period of time. I like rotations mixed with reaction. Like a part of it being a rotation is fine. Don't make the entire thing. I'm looking at you, Black Mage. Just saying. I don't want a really long rotation that I have to go through. That is just keyboard dancing. It's playing DDR with your fingers on the keyboard.
Was also an astrologer.
Yeah.
Was it
make it a
Mage
tree
in
instead
WoW
of a circle?
Same way.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Astrologer was just Black Mage plus RNG with those cards.
Yeah, with those cards. Yeah.
Oh.
Get rid of RNG.
Throw it away.
RNG is the worst.
Yeah. I don't like RNG in my skills, please. No, thank you.
Nope.
If I'm trying to buff somebody, I don't need to go through the same skill 5 times before I finally get the buff I'm looking for, and that time is now passed.
And my mana's gone.
And my mana is gone. But yeah, Rag and Rock says reactionary is fine. A great rotation is pretty mindless once you memorize it and done it a few thousand times. Absolutely. Dark Virtue says to Facade, the utility of a good bard in EQ1 could make or break a group. With Celos movement, speed buff, debuff on mobs, buffs to group attack, power mana regen, health regen ability to help mesmerize mobs in a pinch for crowd control. Loved having a good bard in my group. And I think that is a great example of versatile bard. Not only are you buffing people, you're helping add stuff to CCs, maybe even prolonging those CCs. Or on the opposite side, if your bard is on your side and you're being frozen by, say, like a mage ice attack, that can help lower the amount of time that ice attack takes place.
Debuff redirection.
Yeah, I like that too.
One target to another.
Yeah.
It's also good awareness to have. Like, if you're playing a bard, you have to be aware of what's happening and being able to use the right skill in the right situation on the right person. I think that's also another thing that could be used for skill expression that maybe proximity-based buffing takes away from. But it's a different type of skill expression, so I don't want to say it is a negative thing. I think both are good in their own forms, but yeah, that's something that's really cool too.
How would you feel about with a bard, instead of being a true AoE buffer, if it was single target buffs that you threw out that last 10 or 15 seconds, but had like a 3 or 4 second cooldown? So you still had to kind of pick and choose, and you could have the opportunity to toss out certain buffs on multiple people, but you had to figure out who you wanted to buff and when.
I can't decide if I love it or hate it.
I kind of like that with Luna. Like you can in Marvel Rivals, you can choose somebody to buff them for a period of time, like brief. It goes away. You have to keep applying it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go
I feel
ahead.
like that could provide some problems with mana usage, or at least the balancing of mana usage. As
We could
how
just
low
lower
would
it
you
the more you
put
do it.
those? I mean, yeah.
Lower it
I don't
or
know.
make their combo things where if you do a certain combo, you get back a percentage of mana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I could see that. Yeah, on a successful performance, you get some of it back. Yeah.
Yeah.
You could also make it so like if you keep performing the same spell over and over and over again, the more you cast it, the more mana it takes to de-incentivize just casting it on one person, or
Right.
to not use a different spell on somebody else.
Ooh.
So I
I
mean,
also-
you could do stuff like that too.
I also like the
Lineage 2 had
idea
that. Yeah.
with the bless weapon for cleric during the node wars. I could also choose to get mana regen back by using bless weapon. I could see there being a skill tree option to make something maybe a single target, or make something that single target multi-target, like up to 3 people or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
Either
Tech,
that
you looked
or
like you wanted to say something.
yeah. Well, Joss Leona said that'd be super high APM for very low payout. But what if the payout was actually decently high?
Yeah.
And what if, say, you had more mana regen, like passive mana regen added as you kept your performance going? Like the more skills you had on cooldown when you cast a buff on somebody, the more mana regen you would get from that cast. So you could essentially drop your actual mana usage down to like, say 15-20% of what it normally would be if you just have like 5 other skills on cooldown as you're casting this other buff.
Like a mana succubus. The more you put out like buffs and debuffs, the more you draw on the energy and get mana back.
Yeah.
AV says, what class would be able to cast curses?
Ooh.
A sailor.
A sailor? I like it. It's my kind of answer right there. Yeah,
I feel
Rustwell
like
Beaver
that's
Pirate,
summoner,
thanks for
right?
hanging out.
Yeah.
I do believe from
Nice
the
meeting
timing,
you.
I think you came over with Vladis, so thank you so much
Yeah.
for hanging out after the initial raid. It's much appreciated.
Great comeback.
I think Summoner would be the one that casts curses, right? Sounds summon a curse onto somebody.
Potentially.
Or mage, I don't know.
Yeah. To Mr. Joss's point, so long as that's not the only way to play a bard, let that be a branch in the skill tree? Absolutely. I would love to see multiple ways to play a bard. Going back to the College of Swords, I'd love to see bard x rogue being something much more movement oriented with debuffs while you're using daggers to like toss at somebody. Something like that. I could
That's
see
also
something
why
like
I
that.
want to see like a juggling or a dancing bard and not just like a musical bard, is because you have these classes like rogue, which can be very acrobatic, and you can use these acrobatic type skills to, obviously it's a lot of work on the visual effects team, but that to me would be like peak design, is if you can somehow incorporate all this to create a really cool looking class, or even do like instead of an instrument weapon skill tree, you do like a dancing weapon skill tree, you know?
And that was going to bring me to my answer earlier. The question I'd asked a while back was, what does Bard look like to you? And a good representation for Bard would be your typical Bard that you know with the instruments and stuff, but also in my mind, and this is the direction I went specifically in Final Fantasy XIV, is we had Dancer. And so I loved playing Dancer, but then also you got extra buffs if you paired up with another dance partner. So if there's 2 dancers, that did extra stuff, and it was really, really cool. But then you could also signify somebody as like your dance partner. So I could choose Vertek as a tank as my dance partner and give him specific buffs while I'm also doing damage and other things.
And then
like
if you are in a raid, you have Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Precisely.
Perfect.
Real quick, by the way,
trapeze artist.
I just want to say welcome and thank you so much for the follow to Facade, Devez, and Reserved. Super appreciate that. Um,
Yeah, and to respond to Hera Hero, I think it was. Let me scroll back up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hera Hero says, how do we feel about QuickTime event style abilities? For example, casting Song of Battle to increase damage in your immediate area can empower faster to max cap by hitting the right time, or longer for just auto casting. That was
So-
actually the original design for the auto attack feature. And I used quotey fingers for auto attack because it wasn't an auto attack feature to begin with. It was always just your instead of auto attack like every other game has, it's just your filler attack, and you had to manually push the button every time you wanted to attack with your sword, just a regular sword swipe or a regular staff bop on the head. They started off doing QuickTime events. They had a PvP and PvE demo at one of the PAXs. I think it was PAX West back in like 2019, 2018, something in there. It was a long time ago. Forgive me. But they had a demo, and they decided with that, just watching how people reacted to it in real time at their booth, they didn't want to go that route anymore.
Wait,
'Cause
so
it's,
help me with QuickTime. You mean like he's just you're providing like
So-
an attack speed buff? Is that basically what you're
Quick
saying?
time is
or-
typically like seen in solo playing games where there is a prompt to hit a certain key, you have to hit a certain
Oh.
key within a certain bar range, etc.
it's one of those where like the thing starts like bouncing back from the left to the right, and you have like a single bar in the middle where you got to smash your
You
space
legit
bar
have to
at that
time it?
moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But it works
So
well for
here's-
single player games,
people
but in
kind of do
MMOs,
that.
yeah, but it has to be
People
like
kind of do that already with like weapon swing timers and stuff like that. But I mean, there is like a skill to doing that normally. Yeah, I'm not sure if I like the idea of it being like an actual thing for the
So-
ability.
Here's the problem with quick time events in an MMORPG. There's bound to be ping differences, and if that ping is not, or if that quick time event is not on your client with your ping, then there are much higher margins of error where you will end up missing it.
Yeah.
And I think that could cause a lot of problems. I mean, we see a quick time event
if you
with
put it
Dead by
on-
Daylight too.
I was gonna
you
say, if
know.
you put it on your client, it is also open for cheating, like very
hackable.
easily.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
So if it's not server side, then it's most likely going to be exploited for cheating.
And if it's
Yeah.
server side, you're most likely going to miss it if you have high ping.
Correct.
Yeah, and
So-
also the other thing is if you have somebody playing an MMO who is staring at just a bar as they auto attack, for one, that's going to take
Yeah.
all their attention off the battlefield, and for two, they're not going to realize when they have a lot of stuff off cooldown, they're going to be auto attacking most of the time, and it's going to be a vast difference between the person who's paying attention and the person who's not. Not just
Yeah.
a normal like it's 25% to 40% difference in effective output between the super attentive and the super casual, just chill, whatever happens person.
Now,
Something like that will make it like an 80% spread.
the other thing with the quick time events is I believe at one point in time, Intrepid considered quick time events for things like crafting, but
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
ultimately decided to not include that, I believe.
Probably for the same reason.
Yeah.
And Hera,
and-
just so you know, Hera, sorry to interrupt there, Chibi, but just as a quick point, yeah, just so you know, everybody thought the QuickTime events and whatnot was a really cool idea at first until
Yeah.
it was explained why they weren't going to do it. Because originally it was going to build up a resource that would give you like an extra powerful attack or something, I forget.
yeah.
Or like make the item stronger for crafting. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's also where I could see a buff from a bard being able to help with that. Just increase your chances of getting a really good like scoring or item on the weapon that you're crafting, potentially.
I also
But-
think that we already kind of do have quick time events. When you think about how the battle would go down, let's say there's 20 people around you, all moving, all doing something, and you as a bard need to think what buff you need to give your people, where are your people at, so if it's an AoE, they gotta be in your AoE. What do you want to continue as that buff if we have some kind of a performance that's in a chain does better or whatever. So all of that stuff, you need to make decisions in split seconds. So that's
Right.
already a QTE. So especially if chain performances require you to make a decision within, say, like a second or two, that's the same shit as a reacting to a QTE. So I think that if we get something like chain performances that rely on your actions, we will already have QTEs.
Yes
Right.
and no. Yes and no. And sorry, I'll let you go first, Chibi.
No, go ahead.
But yeah, yes and no, because a QTE is going to be if it's bouncing from one side to the other and you have that much time, like an auto attack, which is a shwoomp, shwoomp, shwoomp. You have 1/10 of a second, or even who knows, 1/20th of a second to react and hit that exact quick time event in the middle of the swing.
It's
just
reaction
shroom.
speed versus more planning. But like
Yes.
I said, if there's
So if-
20 people on the battlefield and you see some dude is about to cast some huge debuff on your healer, and that cast is like a second or maybe even a half second if by any chance we have casting speed related animations, you need to react to that shit as quick as possible. And
Oh, yeah.
that's a half-second decision. So I
But
think it's very similar without the drawbacks of the QTE.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's without the drawbacks of the
real-time
QTE
strategy.
because you have,
Yeah.
let's say if it's a 1 second cast time, let's just say it's only 1 second cast time, which is pretty quick for a big spell, right?
Yeah.
But let's say it's a 1 second. If it takes you a quarter second to see it and react and a quarter second to take the action, you still have a half a second worth of window to hit and make it do its thing. So it's not quite the quick time event reaction
But
period
then,
of like 1/10 of a
realistically,
second.
how
to hit
many
it.
people can react to the QTE on the first pass through of the QTE?
How many
if we
people
are
do you
talking
see-
about this bar?
How many people do you see littering a PvP field versus the victors at the end?
2-3 people maybe will be able to react on the first pass through, and yeah, great, they have great skill or they have great pin on top of great skill, but it's like we will already have insane percentiles where people do crazy stuff and have crazy gear, so why make everyone even more OP when they are already OP?
Yeah. Oh, you mean like if there were the quick time events that they could react instantly to with the good ping and all that stuff,
Yeah.
making them too far above.
Gotcha.
Yeah. That's kind of exactly the point I was making too. Yeah, I absolutely agreed.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to add before I kind of switch up gears here is that in some of the older, I believe, Final Fantasy games, having a bard in your again, I talked about real-time strategy. I believe some of the older Final Fantasy games were planned out strategy games. So having a bard in your class group, your party, allowed you to kind of have the bard always acting first. And that's a lot of times how people use their strategies to clear hard bosses, because the bard could go first, sing their song to help heal. That would then give the rest of the party enough healing to survive the boss mechanic, and then let the white mage do the actual healing later. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think there's a lot of ways that you could give utility with Bard, but Bard specifically, according to Steven over the years, has the intent of filling a tactical, non-healing hard support role. They will have more significance based on their mobility and placement in the battle. Again, as Lloyd mentioned earlier, they are proximity-based skill combination melodies through dance, song, and story. And we'll probably know more about that tomorrow. Bard mechanics include proximity-based skill combination melodies through dances, songs, and stories. Bards can choose to activate buffs that augment tanking, evasion, DPS, and healing abilities in their proximity. Some buffs are related to how the bard performs in combat. If a bard lands a skill shot against a target, allies within a certain range might be granted temporary buff that relates to the skill that the bard used. Bards can also offer proximity-based or proc-based healing, but to a much lesser degree than a cleric. Bards may be able to aid in the restoration of mana, which we definitely heard Stephen mention in a live stream, wishing that there was a bard there. And bards will have a range of abilities to choose from, such as wordsmithing, acting, and musical aspects. They'll be able to play musical instruments, as we saw, and they're intended to not be purely support focused. They'll be a jack of all trades, including offensive and defensive combat abilities, in addition to support abilities and buffs. And there's a lot more there. I'll let you read it, but that's a good key factor on what we know about bards for Ashes of Creation specifically. Thoughts on that alone?
It's a lot. I'm excited.
And to me, that sounds exactly like Lineage 2 with what I'd prefer the most from the Lineage 2 system. So I'm just sitting here waiting for my Lineage 3 once again.
Yeah.
Is there anything that what are like the major takeaways that you don't want to see from Lineage 2 Bard?
Mostly that guild-wide shit. That's it. Everything else I pretty much like. Buffing, canceling buffs, triggers, buff movement, all of that stuff is great. As long as we don't get all of that for raid-wide, guild-wide, or fucking let alone alliance-wide buffing, I'm all good.
So, from someone who never played Lineage 2, because I'm not sure if you'd heard me one of the times people have asked, but I heard of Lineage 2 after apparently it was on mobile, and I said, no, I'm not picking up a mobile MMO. No way.
Yeah, that's late in its life, yeah.
And that's when I heard of it, and that's the very first time I heard the name. I was like, I didn't even know they made a Lineage 2. I heard Lineage 1, and I was playing something else at the time. I think Ultima Online. But, so I haven't played it at all. What in the world did they do for guild-wide? And you said alliance-wide for the Bard?
No, that's what I don't want. From what I remember, there were no alliance-wide stuff. Guild-wide was just your buffs would go to the entire guild instead of just party, as long as they were within an AoE of the buff.
Oh, that's wild.
Which was insane. Yeah, exactly.
Was there a guild limit? Guild size limit?
I believe if you level up the guild to the max, it was like 240, 260, around 300. So pretty much the same as Ashes, give or take.
Jesus. Imagine 300 people all getting... You have one bard in the
and there was
and
no
everybody.
body collision in later updates. So yeah, everyone could pretty much be in the same place and boom, one buff on the entire guild, one buff on the entire guild. The drawback of that was that in Lineage 2 you had overall like 6 or 7 different buffer classes. So the one that could buff the entire guild didn't really have all that many great buffs. So it was like a base level of buffs rather than your party buffers would give you even more and boost you even higher. So it wasn't as OP as it might seem, but it was still fucking OP.
Right.
Some things from the chat were saying, like if there's different skill trees for Bard, that Bard wouldn't be able to use all of the skill trees. They'd have to kind of be limited to one, or maybe like a couple of choices on a different skill tree.
Yep.
That will be difficult.
Yeah. I mean, it's done it. They've done it in World of Warcraft, I believe, where you primarily choose a skill tree, and then you can get a couple of things.
Utility or whatever. Like usually there's a defensive option, an offensive option, like a utility option for like that stuff. And you would normally do like 31-9 or something like that. You'd put like so many points into so many different things, but
this reminds me about the
choice is a good thing to have, not a bad thing, is all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
choice is great, and this reminds me the stuff that Chibi mentioned about combinations of buffs or of effects from different bards. So if say in a raid there are 5 bards and they are all spec'd into something different, their combination of certain zones, especially if they are single target, could provide a much bigger effect that is that has combined effects from all the different buffs. So I think that could be interesting. But again, that's a balancing issue that's got to be tested profoundly.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Hera says, do you think there could be abilities that affect a building in a node, like a tavern, to increase the stat for people who hang out in there, or rested bonus XP gain, if that's a thing? And actually, it's funny because Steven specifically said that restoring rested XP will not be a bard utility. But they will have utility outside of combat, just like all the other classes.
Huh.
That is interesting. I wonder what, like, I think bards in a tavern would be a cool mechanic to have. I wonder if they're just like taking the side of like, yeah, that should be done for roleplay and not gameplay mechanics.
Possibly, but
how's-
there's also a gameplay mechanic already in place. There's sleeping at the tavern.
But
Yeah.
how neat would it be if having a bard at the tavern increased food and rest buffs by like 20%? If somebody was there getting that buff at the time the bard was
pretty
there.
significant. I could see maybe 5%.
Well, if it's a 10% or even a 5% boost to stats, like a lot of buffs are, like it's a 5% increase to attack or something, a 20% increase of that would change it from 5% to 6%.
Oh, okay, 20% of the
Of the buff
initial
itself.
buff.
Of
Of the
Yeah,
effect
yeah.
itself.
Not an additional 20%
Yeah,
on top
no,
of
no,
that.
no,
Was-
that would
my
be
brain was
wild.
like, if that was 20%, that's usually like 40%,
Math.
which is like an additional
Yeah.
almost 50%.
No,
That's
that'd
crazy.
be wild. That'd be wild, absolutely. But no, like
It's
20%
okay. I
of the
too
buff.
also hate math, Chibi. It's fine.
Who does? Who likes math?
No thanks.
But I think that would play in
Einstein.
really well to people being in game doing the thing that they like to do. Because if a tavern is there making food and somebody gets food like quote unquote fresh baked at the tavern, right?
Mhm.
And that gives them an extra buff because it's fresh from the tavern instead of taking it home and then it stales out and you just get a normal buff. Unless you put it in your home microwave / oven. To
Also,
rewarm
wow.
it, but then a bard is also there, so then you get an additional buff from that. So you would literally benefit more greatly by playing and trying to do big events where you need big buffs during the active times, and swinging by when a tavern is full and hanging out with people for a minute before going about your day and doing your thing.
Yeah.
I think that'd be good. I don't know how they really plan to implement it, but I would like it. But maybe they just want to avoid it being one of those things like a bard has to sing at a tavern so that you can be competitively viable to do the dungeon or whatever. Like maybe
Yeah.
that's something they're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
But while we're on the topic of math, I'm hoping Intrepid can just say, how much damage am I actually going to do, and not give me just like, it'll increase 5% of this and 20%, and then you have to figure out the math. Like, can you just tell me the number that I'm gonna do when I get this buff, please? Like,
feel
that
like-
would be so helpful.
I feel like that's kind of hard to do because again,
Yeah, how?
my healing varied depending on the gear I was wearing and the weapon I was using while healing
Yeah,
and things like that. So
they would have to
having
implement the system to account for your gear that you're wearing and add all
Yeah.
those percentages and say this is what you do.
Now, if they had, because this is really easy, it's called programming. Is
Yeah.
what I do for my day job.
Yeah.
You could hover over a buff, and maybe it could calculate for you what
Mhm.
that damage percentage would be. Like,
Yep.
5% of your damage would be this amount for you based on your
Yep.
gear and your stuff. But then again, I think there's the range because did you crit or did you not crit? You know, kind of thing.
I think with all that we would need is just the abilities showing their base power that is directly related to your stats, and then that base power just changing depending on the buffs. So So, for example, if you have 1000 physical attack, and then the ability does base power 100, which results in 1100 attack against someone, disregarding their defenses and whatever. And then if buff gives you plus 10%, then you have like 1210, right? And the ability would just show that it itself does 110, right? Because 10%, and then you add that onto your stats on your own. Because I don't think in any other way you could see what kind of damage you would be doing due to the buff. I have trouble seeing how that would work visually.
Yeah. And I mean, additionally, I mean, going back to what you guys were saying, you don't want it to be guild-wide buffs. I think that's what the guild system should be for. I kind of like how World of Warcraft had the guild-wide buffs that you earned by like playing together with your guildmates, and you unlocked buffs that you could do, but there was a limit to like the buffs. You get like 1 buff per day or 2 buffs per day. And I like that being a separate thing, not like the bard doing the buff for the guild.
Yeah, guild abilities or passives, I'm all for that, because that's the whole guild working towards that. But nothing that you just click your fingers and 40 or let alone 300 people get a buff. That's not.
Yeah,
from one
absolutely. And to Lloyd's point, AV is saying all numbers do is lead to min-maxing. Look, on the one hand, while I'm in the middle of fighting, I don't want to do math in my head on what 5% of my damage is. On the other hand, I already know what I'm doing damage-wise. I know that this mace gives me more damage than that mace does. So all I have to do, I mean, all anything, and I'm going to be honest, all anything is with DPS meters, with min-maxing, it's going to happen regardless, like what Lloyd said. I'm one of the people that like to min-max, but additionally, all a damage meter is, or a DPS meter is taking stock. Watching 30 minutes of you fighting somebody, taking stock of how much damage you're doing, dividing that by 30, or even like, you know, deeper down for damage per minute, damage per second, and figuring out exactly how much damage you're dealing per second. That's all you have to do for a DPS meter. You don't need an add-on for that. You can sit here and calculate it out yourself.
We need to return to monkey. Number go up, good. That's it.
Yeah, pretty much.
But, I mean, that's all I ever really look at. As long as I feel like the time to kill is decent, because I mean, we had this whole conversation before, right? At least on our podcast. There's something to be said about if I am fighting a level 18 mob and I'm level 15, I want to feel the difference of fighting the level 18 versus the level 15 versus the level 12. I want to know what that difference feels like, just naturally, because then when I get better gear, I feel the difference in hitting an 18 before, where I maybe was struggling, and at least now I'm doing much better than I was previously because I got better gear, or I changed up my rotation a little bit.
Yeah, I'm also thinking from like, I'm an 8-year-old playing Ashes of Creation for the first time. I'm looking at my items and it's telling me it's giving me a multiplier, and I don't know how to do multiplication. And I don't know how much damage I'm doing. All I see is maybe it's a 25% increase, but maybe it's actually lower than another item that I'm going to be getting. Like, I want visual clarity on what the actual stat is on my item so that I can more easily choose, okay, this item is better than the other item. That's all I'm asking for.
And I completely disagree with that, because as Hera said, and as my experience with learning English through Lineage 2, school kids better learn math and language in their MMOs. So if an 8-year-old doesn't know math, he better fucking learn that math through the game. So no. Percentages, multiplication, addition, let him go and learn it. No. It's old people don't need math.
Not to mention, it actually creates a very fun and entertaining learning situation for teaching your kid valuable lessons in life. Like, hey, what does this mean when I'm doing 5% more damage? Okay, well, let's sit you down and you know, let's go through this together, because this will help you with schoolwork later. You know,
all I heard was "fuck them kids, bro." Like that's all I heard. Like,
yes.
Well.
If you don't know math, that's a you problem, not me problem.
The other thing is, I remember, frankly, when I was like 13 playing World of Warcraft, I didn't care about the things I care about as an adult. All I cared about is going around and being a cool like ranger, because my dad was like, this is the easiest class for you to play because you don't know how to play MMO. It was my very first one. And I was like, okay. So I'm like running around shooting things with my pet that I tamed, and that's what I cared about. It was like, oh, look at this cool pet that I got, and okay, like I'm going through the dungeons, I got this new cool gear. Like that's all I care about at the end of the day. But as an adult, I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely a min-maxer. If I can get that much more out of like whatever I'm doing, I'm gonna do it, because I want to do the most healing. I want to do the best amount of whatever I'm working on, just because like that's what I find fun.
Yep.
Oh, loudy. Well, folks, it is nearing that time of night. By nearing, I mean we're pretty much there. So we're gonna be starting to get ready to raid out here. Lloyd, would you like to make any closing statements? Do you have any final words for the viewers? Anything you'd like to plug?
Thank you for having me. I guess the only thing I got going on is the big dev update tomorrow. I'll be working, so I won't be streaming it. But Sunday, I will be on twitch.tv/Gray Sentinels, and we will be doing our monthly podcast. So make sure to stop by on Sunday at 5 p.m. PST, 8 p.m. Eastern, and I'll see you there.
Heck yeah. And Lulu, would you have any last words?
Yes, return to Monkey, go full Unga Bunga, and join the Cirque du Soleil if you want to be a bard. Also follow me at Ludulu on Twitch, because I need 50 followers. Thank you, please and thank you.
Also,
do it now.
If you guys like more conversations like this, they have a lot of these types of conversations in our Discord. So don't be shy. Come join our Discord, and maybe you'll see when these people are live and doing their thing, because we have the little, I mean, Discord has the little thing where like if you go live, it changes. I mean, provided you're not offline or do not disturb, it'll change your icon to purple. So you know, that kind of stuff. But we're gonna raid over to Tuck Duck 22. He's playing some Grand Blue Fantasy at the moment. Talk about MMOs. And oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
And I had a lot of fun sitting here talking about like Bard, and it was very eye-opening to see how Bard was in Lineage 2, because after all, we know that Intrepid takes a lot of inspiration from those older games. So it's really helpful, and I'm very excited to see what we find out tomorrow, personally.
Thank you too.
Well, and for those who don't know, by the way, Tech Deck may not do a whole lot of Ashes type content right meow. He'll do some watching of the live streams and some reacts, but he did organize some PvP tournament type events during the Alpha 1. So he is active. He's more into the games that are currently doing things for most of his content. So
like a lot of our content creators who are idly, I need to make content, but I'm waiting for the game to come out for the real content to begin.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So.
But thank you everybody who hung out here and chatted with us. Thank you, Lloyd, so much for joining us, and thank you, Lulu, so much for joining us. I know you were streaming right before we did, and I was just trying to lurk you for the evening, but then you joined us, which is I'd rather have you in voice chatting with us, to be honest. So thank you. Much
Thanks
appreciated.
for having me.
Of course.
And everyone else, thank you so much for chatting. Everyone, have a fantastic evening, and we will catch you around next time.
Catch you next time.
Love you guys. Bye.
Till then,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.